and welcome to today's web chat. My name is Helen Amas. I work in the TES resources team, and I'm joined today by Jackie O'Hanlon, who is the Director of Education for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and Toby Parkin, who is Outreach and Resources Manager for the Science Museum. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Today we're going to be chatting about the role of cultural organisations such as museums and galleries within education and the different opportunities that they offer to teachers. I want to just start by asking you, were cultural institutions part of your own education when you were young? Do you have memories of going to galleries or to museums when you were children?
Certainly at my school it happened very late. An English teacher joined the school when I was doing O-levels, and we went on a trip to Stratford, where I now work, and we saw Merry Wives of Windsor. And we also went to see The Winter's Tale. And I remember it had a really, really big effect on me, because we then had a workshop with one of the actors that was in The Winter's Tale. And it completely transformed my understanding of the play. And I suppose odd that that's what I now do.
Yes.
Is help other people have that experience.
It kind of was a bit of an inspiration for you, perhaps.
Absolutely.
How about you, Toby?
Yeah, I grew up in West London, so I remember going to Kew Gardens when I was about 5, and then I remember the Science Museum actually came to my school. I remember we did a workshop trying to make a bridge, and I think I found that so kind of interesting that it kind of inspired me to kind of study science, I suppose, in my own time as well. And I suppose that's why I ended up at the Science Museum.
It's interesting. It's the same organisation that you now work for was the one that gave you that inspiration in the first place. We're going to talk a little bit about all the different types of opportunities that you offer within education, both within the classroom and outside of that. I think that when people think about museums and galleries and they think about school trips and going there, obviously planning a school trip to one of your institutions is quite a big undertaking for teachers these days, with risk assessments and parental consent. How can a teacher who wants to organise a trip perhaps justify the time away from the classroom, the spending to their line managers or their senior staff? What advice would you give to them?
I think in terms of Shakespeare, we're dealing with a very complex area of the curriculum, and if we launched a manifesto for Shakespeare in schools about 3 years ago, saying that we think 3 things need to happen for children and young people to really own the texts and feel engaged by them and inspired by them, or have a chance of doing any of those things. And those 3 things are: they need to see Shakespeare live, start Shakespeare earlier, hopefully in the primary classroom, and do Shakespeare on their feet, explore it actively. And I think that act of seeing Shakespeare live is the only way that we can really make sense of the plays. It's a communal experience. The audience is as much a part of that performance as the actors on stage, and we miss a huge part of the meaning of the play if we don't experience it live at a theatre.
Of course, that's what it was written for. It was written to be performed, wasn't it?
I think for me, I'd start with the national curriculum. I think a trip to most museums can enrich the curriculum, and we have teachers who come to the museum and will get weeks, maybe even a term's worth of work out of that one visit. I think what else I'd use is the Learning Outside the Classroom manifesto, which is kind of really, the government are really pushing it, and it's kind of saying that actually there are experiences that a child can have outside of the classroom that will really enrich their learning and will make learning meaningful. For when, say, they're studying science in the classroom, they come out to a museum and they see the objects, it makes it meaningful, it brings it back to their own lives, and you can just use it as a launch pad, as a kind of a springboard into the rest of your work for the year. So that's how most teachers kind of justify it internally before they kind of approach us.
Yeah.
And then I think, you know, what we do and what many cultural institutions do is we just try and make it as easy as possible.
Yeah.
By having kind of generic risk assessments, by having bookings offices to suggest things, to having, you know, websites with the full kind of menus of what's on offer.
And so those risk assessment forms, is that something that they can download online, teachers? Or?
Yeah, I mean, definitely with the Science Gym, and I think that goes for most places.
That's the same for us as well. It's again, yes, it's trying to make it as easy as possible for the teacher to do all of the paperwork that they have to do in order to justify coming on the visit. So yes, that's available online, and we and other organisations as well have a specially trained box office team who also understand, they operate within school hours, just before, manning their phone lines before the school day, just at the end of the school day, during lunch breaks, those busy times, so that teachers are able to actually get through and talk to somebody who can also give them the information that they need.
What about funding opportunities? Is there any opportunities that you're aware of for teachers to access some funding that can help them to run these kind of trips?
I think that's often, schools will tend to know more about that actually than sometimes the organisation. There are local pots of money that you can access. For example, in London, the John Lyons Foundation is a foundation that encourages applications from schools for small projects, and that won't be the only example of that across the country, and so it is a matter of schools maybe joining up with other schools and putting in a bid to a local foundation or a local trust in order to maybe spread out a number of visits across a year of developing, what is it we want for our learning outside the classroom curriculum, and how can we put a bid in to a trust or formation to support that.
It's an interesting idea of joining up with different schools. Do you find that schools are quite eager to do that? Do you have...
Yeah, more and more. I think more now that funding for schools isn't going kind of centrally through a learning authority. It's now being dished out directly to the schools, and so they have to become kind of less insular, and they have to look kind of to the school down the road and see, well, can we team up? Can we use that funding to kind of fund a trip? So yeah, definitely they are kind of teaming up more, especially actually with outreach. Both our institutions do outreach, and I think we often will go to a school and another school's visiting, and they're working out the finances between them.
Yeah,
I think that's absolutely true, and what we're seeing much more is schools working outside of geographical boundaries by the informal networks that they're creating themselves, through a particular learning focus or through a particular challenge that they're all trying to overcome together, and therefore they will book an outreach day that is bespoke to the particular needs that they've got, whether that's a CPD need or a need for a student body that they've got. So we're seeing that much more than we used to.
Would you like to just tell us a bit about those outreach programs that you offer, actually? Because I know that both of your organisations are very interested in that and trying to offer something to teachers and schools who aren't necessarily able to come visit you.
Yes, and from our point of view, we think as a national organisation it's really important that we are able to make an offer to any school anywhere in the country. So the outreach programme that we primarily offer is through Teacher CPD. So we'll go to any school, anywhere, and run an outreach day for up to 25 teachers, and that can be, everybody from an English and drama department in a large secondary school, or it can be a collection of primary schools or secondary schools, or a mixture working together. That's our primary outreach programme, but we also do... we have a long-term partnership programme called the Learning and Performance Network, where we work in partnership with schools across the country for 3 years, and we invite schools to apply for that programme. And we also are tending to now tour our work out to schools as well as to venues. So we're trying to widen the risk that we are willing to take in going into schools, instead of schools taking a risk on the expense of having to organise a school trip to Stratford. How do we get out on the road more and take that work directly into the heart of the community?
Yeah.
I mean, we're very similar. I mean, at the Science Museum we have a really huge outreach function. We reach 150,000 students off-site per year, and so we visit between about 200 and 300 schools a year. So we have a big team there, in kind of, each day there'll be 2 or 3 schools in the day, but it'll be a full day, and we work nationally and internationally as well. So it's a kind of a huge function, but it's often with schools they don't always know about it, which is a bit funny, because I mean our organisation does it, but there are many other providers as well, not just in the cultural institutes, but businesses as well, and you have TIE for theatre and things like that, all offering kind of days. And so yes, we do that kind of directly for the students, and then similar we do CPD. I mean, quite often we'll go out to a school and we'll do CPD in their school, and we'll try and kind of cluster some schools together to do that. And also kind of online. I mean, it's never quite as effective when you're trying to inspire young people, but it's a tool to reach millions rather than thousands. So.
Yeah, that's something I'll perhaps come back and ask you about in a moment. We've had a question come through from a teacher on Twitter. You just mentioned some different cultural organisations and what they offer. With so many different cultural institutions out there, how can teachers make sure they pick the best one for their class?
Well, I think it's a really
it's a
good question,
isn't it?
It is, and I think word of mouth is a very effective way of. We certainly see that. A school will phone up because they've been recommended by another school, and I think that is the best way of finding out about it. There isn't a national one-stop shop website you can go to where cultural organisations are graded according to the kind of offer that they make. We don't have Ofsted inspections. We don't, there aren't those equivalencies in the cultural sector, and I think it is really difficult for schools to be able to assess when they feel bombarded by lots of promotion and marketing literature and opportunities from cultural organisations. Well, which one is for me? So I would say it is about, if you've got the time, contacting the cultural organisation, because we should be able to have developmental conversations with schools, and you should be able to assess from that developmental conversation whether we're able to meet your needs, but also through looking, through your networks, who do you know in your region that might be making connections with cultural organisations, and what feedback are you getting? We're only as good as the work that we're currently doing now and the feedback that we get now.
I think it depends on the subject and what you're trying to get out of it, so I think you have to establish that first. But then I think it's good to look locally first. So to think about the cultural institutions that are on your doorstep, because they're more likely to want to build a relationship with your school, because the school is the gatekeeper to the students, which the cultural institution is going to be trying to engage.
Of course.
So maybe talking to the council, maybe kind of just checking on websites in your borough or your kind of local area, and then I think nationally, because many larger cultural institutions will have national functions. Yeah. So for us in the Science Museum, we're part of a group of museums where there are 4 museums, and there's one in Manchester, one in York, and one in Bradford. So, but a school, say, kind of up in York, wouldn't necessarily, if they were studying science, they might not think, the Science Museum, but they have the Railway Museum in York, which covers science, and so I think it's, it is word of mouth as well, and this experience and talking to other teachers are key as well.
And I guess that kind of communication and that getting involved in conversation is something which digital technology and social media can help with. Do you find that those that's kind of changing the way that your organisations work and the way that you engage with teachers and students?
We are certainly that the amount of dialogue that is now able to happen through social media just wasn't possible before. So the very direct kinds of feedback that both we get, but that also gets sent out about the work that we do. And you kind of have to let that go. There are conversations happening in lots of different places about different cultural organisations' work, and that's great, because it means that the quality debate is very live. It's happening, and we're sometimes part of it and we're sometimes not. But it's also we've had to rethink, how do we enable our work to be put onto a digital platform? So we're a theatre company, we believe in being in the same space and having experience together, whether that's a CPD experience or whether it's a theatre experience.
Sure.
So how do we translate that into a digital format, and without compromising on the sense of community that is at the heart of any theatre experience or workshop experience? So we're exploring different ways of doing that. We've just launched an online professional development programme called Teaching Shakespeare, and we're trying to make that a very interactive, dialogic experience, so that teachers are able to respond to us about the real-time work they're doing in the classrooms and what's happening when they are using these methodologies in the classroom.
Sure.
But it has radically altered the way we think about our work and how we get our work out, radically.
I think I think cultural institutions are learning how to use Twitter and the internet better, and I think slowly we're getting better and we're getting up to speed. And I think we're always surprised by what teachers want from it, because I think initially, if an institution has a Twitter account, they generally don't want to just put marketing on it. But sometimes that is just what teachers want. They just want to hear what you're doing. They want simple links to resources, and so actually that's kind of countercultural for an institution who doesn't just reach teachers, who also reaches kind of the general public as well. And so more and more you're seeing cultural institutions will have a separate account, for a Twitter account just for teachers, or separate kind of channels to reach teachers, because they what they want is different to what the general public want. And so we're gradually learning that, and we're having teachers advise us about how they want to engage with us, and so we are kind of trying to use it as a marketing tool. And we're also trying, as you said, to put kind of more resource online, just so that teachers kind of internationally can access your work. So.
And are you both kind of working towards internationalising the work that you're doing and trying to actively reach teachers in different geographical areas?
Yes, we are. I mean, the RSC does tour internationally anyway, and has got a strong international profile, and there is a hunger for the education work internationally, and I think that's really interesting for us because it enables us to think about Shakespeare as a global playwright, not just the English playwright.
Yeah.
And I think the passion that we see in other countries for Shakespeare's work is really interesting, and the ownership that we see in different cultures. We did some research with the British Council, and it suggests that 50% of school children in the world are studying Shakespeare each year.
Wow.
And so that's a really huge global community of teachers that we can all start talking with and to. And I think it's really exciting, the kinds of conversations that can happen between practitioners in Brazil and practitioners in England about why we teach Shakespeare and what we see happening in our students when they own the language, what the challenges are, how they interpret it for themselves, what the relevance is to the world we live in. So I think there's a lot of exciting potential for that, and we want to do much more of it through the online programmes.
I guess with science, it's kind of, there's global developments happening in science all the time as well, aren't there?
Definitely, and it's generic and it's in the curriculum for every country. So I mean, so for us, it's actually fairly easy for us to go abroad. So my team have just been in Hong Kong. We've done work in kind of Turkey and Korea as well. So kind of similar places. I mean, but we're quite lucky in that we're large cultural institutions, so we can physically put people on the ground in those countries. I think for smaller cultural institutions, it's a little bit trickier, mainly because of funding. So I think that's where the internet is really important for them to kind of have an international presence.
I've actually got a question from our science advisor here at the TES, who is asking about how you integrate cutting-edge discoveries and kind of scientific developments into what you offer, your kind of educational offerings.
So we have a gallery at the museum specifically for contemporary science that changes its content every 6 months. And then we also have funded outreach projects that go out into schools and actually CPD as well, and we specifically teach teachers how to teach contemporary science and how to run debates in the classroom. So there's a few different ways we do it, and we try to kind of weave it into our kind of day-to-day work as well. But I mean, so it's kind of we're lucky in that in the museum we have so many kind of historical objects, and so sometimes it's interesting to bring in a more contemporary side to science, and then because you can kind of provide some of the other side to your historical objects. So we do try and put it across everything we do, but then we do have projects that specifically tackle that.
Are there any interesting contemporary science sort of projects that you've covered recently?
Gosh,
That's probably a big
I'm trying to think. I mean, we have an exhibition at the moment about pain, and I think as a teacher, obviously pain's not on the curriculum, but as a teacher, you might go there and you might think about how scientists are researching the kind of current work they're doing in taking kind of, I think they're taking venom from spiders and using that to anaesthetise people, and so you can look at the stories that's generating, and you can debate that in the classroom, and you can think, well, how does science progress, and how is science portrayed in the media, and so you can take an exhibition that's not specifically on the curriculum to debate, and you can draw out things about how science works, which is definitely on the curriculum.
And it gives it kind of some context and some relevance to the students, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
We've mentioned CPD a couple of times now. Outside of just professional workshops and things like that, do you think that cultural organisations have a role in just developing passion for a subject and kind of keeping that alive in teachers who are quite often perhaps overworked and get swamped with paperwork and things like that?
I really hope so. And that's the whole basis of our CPD programme, really, that what we do is look at how we as a theatre company have to access these texts. Everything we do with teachers and everything we do with students isn't made up for the classroom. It's real world work that has to happen in our cultural organisation in order for us to make sense of the complex texts that we bring life to on stage. And if we don't do that work, they are dead.
Yeah.
And it's a very powerful form of learning, I think, when we say to students, these aren't made-up things, these are what actors and directors have to do. They respond completely differently to those approaches and strategies because they're not games, it's real. And people get paid to do this because if they don't do it, the plays can't make sense to them. And I hope that through our professional development work with teachers, we are able to have a closer and closer dialogue, because I don't feel there should be the divorce that there can be between what happens in an English classroom or a drama classroom when a play text is studied, and what happens in a rehearsal room when a group of actors and directors grapple with what the text means. I feel we're both trying to do the same things, just in different contexts, and there is a huge amount we have to offer each other.
I mean, definitely, and it's so important that we do that. And we're always surprised by how keen teachers are to be inspired, and that they literally want that. I mean, to give you an example, we open up the museum at night once a month on the last Wednesday of each month, and we get thousands of people come. But over the years we found that there were hundreds of them were teachers, and so now once a term we have a specific teacher zone where they can get some CPD stuff, they can see what we're doing, but they can just generally talk to each other about science and teaching. And we get hundreds of teachers coming at night on a school night.
Amazing.
And so it's so important. And I think what you've got to understand is that for a cultural institution, a teacher is an adult, and therefore they're almost in a separate segment. They're in a separate market for you. And so you're trying, as a cultural institution, you're trying to reach them anyway, because for us, our overall aim is we want to raise scientific literacy across the country, across all ages, not just young people. And so we want to do that with adults. We don't necessarily want all people to become scientists. We just want them to be further engaged with science, and so teachers as adults come into that segment for us. So inspiration is essentially the main thing that cultural institutions do. So it's really important.
I suppose kind of moving on from that inspiration idea, I think that both Shakespeare and science are things that really come to life once you take them out of the textbook, off the page. What are some of the best reactions that you've had to your work, either from teachers or from students, where people have really been inspired by the work that you're doing?
Well, it's ever so difficult to answer that because we sound as though we're showing off. But,
that's fine.
I'm trying to do that, but we do get really amazing reactions to the work from teachers saying, this has transformed the way I work in the classroom. I'm sure there are, to measure all of that, don't you? I'd love to do a longitudinal study on how what do we mean by transformation, and how long does a transformation happen in, and what kinds of ongoing support do we need to provide for teachers who are working in really difficult circumstances to keep that level of aspiration, inspiration going in the classroom, because it does take effort to apply active pedagogies, to work in very different ways than in a traditional classroom setup. So, but what we hear back from teachers is this is a hugely important piece of inspiration for us. This is about transforming our practice. This is about reconnecting us with our passion for teaching, our passion for our subject. And in terms of students, the transformation is we work as an ensemble. We apply the principle of ensemble. It works beautifully in a rehearsal room, it works beautifully in a classroom. We apply the principle of a rehearsal room as a place of possibilities, so is a classroom. And the feedback from students is there's something that happens with Shakespeare, and I'm sure it's the same with science. I think there's some really strong correlations between those areas of the curriculum that are complex and have they feel as though you have to really climb a hurdle to get them. That when students feel a sense of achievement and ownership of those subjects, that they feel they can do anything. So that confidence boost that comes from a child being able to say, I can do Shakespeare, I can do anything, that happens. And we've been doing research about what happens to the child's sense of self and themselves as a learner and their attitude to school if you change their attitude to Shakespeare. And there are really strong correlations we're seeing between that. When you change an attitude towards a complex area of the curriculum, you change the child's attitude to themselves as a learner and to how they feel about being at school. And those sound very kind of laudable claims, don't they? But I think that that does happen. It can happen. And that's what excites me as an educationalist working in a cultural organisation, that kind of impact that it's possible to have when we work in partnership with teachers, with schools.
Yeah, I think that the best reactions that we get are when you have people who come into the museum and who say, well, I didn't know you did science like this, or you know, they've already put up so many barriers to your subject, and then suddenly they find that your subject, it didn't need those barriers, and actually it's not how they thought it was. I think that's the best thing. I think we have a kind of a lot of quick wins almost, and that, you know, I won't play the trumpet for the science museum, but museums in general find that you have adults who come in and say, oh, I came here as a child and I loved it, and that's what turned me on to science or history or kind of biology or whatever. And so almost that's the quick win, and so that's good. I think what kind of feels better in some ways is when you engage someone who's already made the decision to not like your subject.
Yeah.
So we go to, I mean, we do some outreach work in prisons, and we do some kind of very difficult students we work with as well, kind of outside of prisons as well, and I think the effect that it can have on them, and it's difficult because sometimes you only see the short-term effect, and it's very difficult to measure any long-term effect.
Of course.
But you can see in that short term that actually the barriers are coming down, and that they do have a kind of renewed attitude. You know, and like I said, it'd be really interesting to go back to those people 20, 30 years down the line and say, well, has that affected your decisions in school? Does that mean that you took sciences at GCSE? Even if it didn't, does that mean that as an adult, you know, you read science stories in the media now, and you're kind of a little bit suspicious about how it's being portrayed? You know, and just those things, and you can't attribute that to one thing in someone's childhood, you know, coming to a museum. But I think it's working when schools and when cultural institutions and when other providers are all working together to educate someone, and you get someone who comes out the other end who kind of has a different attitude towards science than maybe, or any subject, compared to when they went into formal and informal education.
Sure. We've got another question come through from Twitter. We've been speaking a bit about how complex both of these kind of areas are. How do you decide what to give away and what to hold back when you have schools visiting you? So when you're kind of designing your educational programmes, how do you decide how to pitch it?
It's a really interesting question, because I think artistically what I come up against sometimes is, because I don't think we should hold back on anything. I think certainly in terms of the creative process and what happens in rehearsal rooms and why particular choices have been made about a play, I think the more information, the more we can give to school groups and teachers, the better experience they're going to have of being in the theatre, and the more informed they're going to be back in the theatre. But for some of our artists feel as though we should hold back, because they feel as though we're giving up, like they'll say, oh, we shouldn't let them know the end of the play, as if knowing how Romeo and Juliet ends is going to somehow not make it a meaningful experience for you. So I think we have a job of work to do of just helping artists understand that the more we can expose our process, the more we can look at the transferability between how we work as a theatre company and the daily business of teaching and learning in the classroom, the better everybody is and the more understanding that we share. And I think that is a journey that we're gradually going on with artists within the organisation. I hope that answers.
I think in terms of science, I don't think there's no limit to what a child can understand. I think sometimes we think that, oh, they won't understand that, but if you start from kind of basic principles, you can work a lot of scientific concepts up to kind of a very intense level and get a child to understand that. And so in that sense, no, we don't hold anything back. We'll freely try and educate someone about the Large Hadron Collider, which is really, you know, really complicated. But if you start from basic principles, you can get there in the end. I think what we have to hold back because of time, though. And time isn't, you know, for us isn't infinite with individuals, and so we have to limit. And so we tend to stop at the point where we think that we might just have whet their appetite, so that they can go off and complete their study on their own.
I think that's true. So we've just done a young people Shakespeare tour of King Lear. So we would also say there's no play that you can't do. We possibly might draw the line at Titus Andronicus, but I'm still keen that somehow we can do it. But we've made a young people Shakespeare production of King Lear, and the only difference is it's 75 minutes long. So we're not saying that this is the definitive King Lear, but it's part of a continuum. We hope that what these formative experiences of Shakespeare will do for young people is open up a lifelong relationship with it, so that they'll want to come back to the theatre or back to the play texts. And what you've done is given them the confidence to want to do that. So I agree, there's nothing that should be off limits. Children, young people of all ages are capable of huge understandings of very complex literature and very complex scientific ideas.
I think just before we wrap up, we're just about running out of time. What do you think can be done to encourage students to go beyond just what they learn in the classroom and to kind of encourage this kind of lifelong love of culture and an interest in attending cultural institutions, not just because their teacher tells them that they have to?
I think it's how is that part of the general school experience, that if in our school culture is part and parcel of what we do, rather than the thing we might do once a year. Mm-hmm. And it's very complicated for a school, because a school has got so many things it's got to do and so many drivers for it. But making the arts and culture an embedded part of every child's school experience, I think, is hugely important, and also bringing the arts and culture into the classroom, as well as it being part of what we do outside of school, is also hugely important. And we can only do that when we understand more about each other and also work more in partnership with each other. But I would want all students to feel that what we have to offer as a cultural institution belongs to them. And
give them ownership.
And give them absolute ownership of it. They don't have to love it. But I want them, if they don't want to engage with it, make that choice from an informed place, not from a place of fear.
Yeah.
I think for me, a lot of it comes down to the parents, actually. I mean, there's been, in science, there's been lots of studies that show that a child's, or kind of a teenager's attitude towards science is actually formed more at home than it is at school. It depends on what their parents' attitudes are, because they'll probably copy them as role models. Yeah. And so it's tricky for a teacher. I think we put a lot of pressure on teachers to say, well, you need to fully educate this child, when they don't. Yeah. They just need to, yes, the lion's share does sit with them, but there must also be some emphasis on cultural institutions to provide opportunities, but also parents, I think, as well. So any influence that a teacher can have over a parent on taking that child to a cultural institution in the evening or at the weekend or in the holiday, on the 6 weeks that they'll get off in the summer, I think is vital. I think schools probably already do as much as they can. So I think it's shared ownership of that, really.
Thank you, Jackie and Toby, for joining us today, and thank you to everyone who's been watching and sending in their questions via Twitter. You both share your resources on the TES website at the moment, and people can access information about your organisations via your websites or by Twitter.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Goodbye.